Boom, we are back for video 18. Today's topic, intuitive eating. What the hell is it? Why is it so popular? Concepts of it, and everything literally related to nutrition that we can put into the short period of time we have allocated for ourselves to touch on these things. So what are your thoughts on intuitive eating? What do you even think it is, and why is the concept coming to life? And how does it differ with people who go for calorie counting and so forth? Which would be more useful as well, but we're going to touch up on that. So let's just start with what even is intuitive eating, and are people doing it right?
Yeah. So intuitive eating, in my interpretation of it, most people that preach this are like, you just got to listen to your body and eat to your hunger signal and stop eating. Like that's basic the gist of it, right? Like listen to your body and your body will let you know how much to eat. So
And
there
we
really
see that doesn't really work in real life because people are just
absolutely
ignoring
not.
it.
And we'll talk a little bit on like why that doesn't work and why it can work, because there are people that can do that and people that cannot. Okay, and why does that happen? And then the other thing is that's only one part of the equation, like how much to eat, right? The intuitive eating crowd is only focusing on how much to eat as if that's the main thing, and it's not. What is the main thing is what response does your body get from the food you eat? That is where the rubber meets the road, right? So let's put it this way: why does listening to your hunger signals not work for a lot of people? Because a lot of people's metabolism, like hormonal influx of like what happens when they ingest some food, is not correct to begin with, right? We see that all the time with pre-diabetics or anything like that, where it's like they can eat and they are hungry in 10 minutes. Okay, so how is somebody like that going to intuitively eat? The answer is they can't. Okay, and same thing for people that are like really like into like counting their macros and stuff. The moment you tell them you can't count your macros, now you got to eyeball it. They're going to have a pretty good idea of like how much food to put on their plate, but they won't be able to be like, for the most part, they won't be able to go, that is enough food for right now. And then, 2 hours later, they might be like, do I need to eat right now? Am I really hungry or am I not hungry? Like their hunger cues are all messed up. So what dictates the thing we should be focusing on when it comes to intuitive eating is what actually dictates what happens when you put stuff in your mouth. Okay. And it really comes back to our basic episodes of, does your body understand what time of day it is? Because that's going to influence your hunger signals. If it doesn't know what time of day it is, it's going to be hard for it to influence this. And a really easy way to like get an idea of like this mismatch and how it influences your hunger is this. I know a lot of people have done this. It's nighttime, the sun has gone down, you have all your lights on, you've ate dinner already, but the longer the night goes on, the more you're like, I need to go to the pantry and find a shit ton of chips or something to put in my face. Why is that happening? It's happening because your body is interpreting that environment as being noontime because you've had all these lights on and stuff like that. So it's changed your hormonal response in the moment of what you need next. Your body's thinking it's noon and you should be active. So we need some fuel to fuel activity. But the problem is it's actually nighttime and you're going to be going to bed in an hour or two. So what ends up happening, you get this overwhelming craving of like, I need some food, and you go raid sugar because that's what you're craving, and you stuff yourself with that, and then you go to bed. So your blood sugar was high already from the fake light. You raised it even higher because you ate a bunch of shitty carbs, and then you went to bed and didn't do anything with it. What is your body going to do with that? Well, it's going to store it as body fat. Like that's just what's going to happen. So intuitive eating really, for me, comes down to intuitive living. Okay, it doesn't come down to what you put in your mouth. If you live intuitively, as in with the sun rising and falling and the daylight hours, your body automatically starts changing the signals that it gives you for food. Then you can be intuitive with your food because you're actually going to interpret them correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of gives again more of incentive. Hey, if you have a break at work, go outside for a minute, you know, and which people don't do anymore. They like just
Yeah, yeah.
get
I
in the
mean,
car, drive to work, sit there all day, and then even gym is in their own local little area where they work. I've seen a lot of guys whom I work personally with who have gyms at home, and they barely even go out anymore.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, so and that influences that. Okay, so daylight signals influence your hunger signals. Another thing that influences your hunger signals, and this will apply to people more kind of like in the northern hemisphere, so a lot of people in Europe and stuff like that, and that is cold. Cold also influences hunger. Okay, if you are cold adapted, you actually get different hunger signals than if you're in the summer. So you will choose foods differently, the types of foods. You're going to lean towards fattier foods. Most people in the macro counting crowd will be like, oh, you don't really want to do that. You want to keep your fat as low as possible so that it doesn't turn into fat and eat a lot of high. I'm like, well, if it's winter, that's a mismatch. And you're actually going to start craving more and more carbohydrates, which trumps your intuitive eating, right? If you're all of a sudden craving more carbohydrates, well, you're not going to be able to gauge how much to eat because your body's literally telling you to eat more. Okay, so cold also influences hunger signals pretty dramatically, especially when it's in the right time of year. Right? If it's cold outside, expose yourself to cold. Go outside in the cold. Your body will start to change what it craves by just those signals. So it really comes down to the intuitive lifestyle is super simple. Get outside, no matter the time of year. And depending on the time of year, you'll start to notice that you intuitively lean towards, hey, I'm going to have more steak tonight than I did in the summertime. Whereas in the summertime, you know what? I'm going to have more potatoes or more rice or more fruit, right? You're going to lean more towards that. You're going to crave more of those if you're getting outside regularly. So it really comes down to intuitive eating starts with living outside, not necessarily like living outside, but like getting outside regularly throughout the day. And the more often and the more consistent you are with that, the more intuitive you will be able to do the eating part. So intuitive eating doesn't start with eating, it starts with living.
so when it comes to actual performance, let's say hypertrophy, strength, endurance, fat loss, is this really the best way if you want to be at elite level in any of those? Is intuitive eating possible?
I would say it is possible because there are people that can do it. Okay, there are people that can do the whole intuitive eating thing and perform at a high level. Those people also happen to be people that literally, for whatever reason, their lifestyle allows them to be outside a lot more than normal. Okay, that doesn't mean they have to work construction. It just means that their lifestyle happens to be an outdoor lifestyle, and those people are going to be high performers in the intuitive eating realm and on their performance realm, just because their body starts to tell them more about what they need better. Their communication, their information from the environment and their activity uh, matches up with their brain chemistry better. So, yeah, there is that possibility. Do I Most people won't be able to achieve that unless they already have the prerequisite lifestyle,
Yeah.
the high performance part, right? Like really performing high in your sport or your activity and also being intuitive on what you eat. Those two combinations are rare, but do they happen? Yeah, absolutely. But it starts with the prerequisite of this person actually happens to kind of live outside a lot of the time.
So let's dig into what's more important now. Is it eating for calories, eating for macros, any specific supplements here or there? So let's go. Is there a difference between strength training, hypertrophy, and let's say fat loss when it comes to food quality, or can I just follow calories and Forget
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah, yeah. So, and again, we are not prefacing this with like, how would I say, the most efficient outcomes or the most precise outcomes. We're prefacing this with intuitive eating, right? Can you achieve these outcomes with intuitive eating? And the answer is yes. And there are some rules that make it easier, right? Always, always, always choose whole foods above all. Okay. So if those aren't first on your plate, you're already doing the intuitive eating part incorrect. That's just how it is. Like, the moment you go to processed foods or anything like that, you have to be pretty in control of how much you're putting on the plate, right? Like whether you use macros to do that or an actual measuring cup, you have to actually kind of go that far when it comes to processed foods. The reason for that is because processed foods don't send the same signals. Okay. Again, go to the very beginning of this episode. What happens after you put the food in your mouth is more important than the food um, the amount of food that you put in there, right? Like, because if you put, for example, let's just go with cereal, okay? Because it's popular and
yeah,
a lot of
it's
people want to
breakfast
use.
food after all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, I ate a cup of cereal. Okay, that was the right amount to eat for your goal, or whatever at that meal. You ate it, but say you didn't even count it, right? You just poured it in a bowl, you ate it. You get done and you're wondering if it was enough or not. How are you going to tell that it was or not? If you rely on your response from that cereal, you're probably going to eat another bowl because you're actually not going to be full and your blood sugar is going to spike pretty quick. And that may be good or bad depending on your goal. But if you don't assess how much you ate, you don't know how much more to add because you don't have a satiety feeling coming from that particular food. Does that make sense? Whereas if you ate a potato, right? Like let's just say same amount of calories, like hypothetically speaking, you ate 50 carbohydrates from cereal versus 50 carbohydrates from potato. I guarantee you're going to feel completely different if you ate that potato and you sat for like 5 or 10 minutes after you got done eating. You probably would be like, you know what, that was probably right. That was the right amount of food. Whereas the cereal is going to be much more difficult to intuitively make that decision, right? So that's where it becomes problematic with the intuitive eating. Choose whole foods. It will make it easier to be intuitive about when to stop eating or if you've ate too much.
And I think people need to kind of grasp concepts that whey protein is processed food as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's processed food. It's 100% processed food. Like a lot of people think like I classify it as food, but I classify it as processed food. I do not put it in the same realm as a steak. Period. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, are there times where those are beneficial? Absolutely. And at that point in time, you're going to measure it. There's a scoop in the thing. You're going to measure how much you need. So that's why I'm not really including this in the whole intuitive eating conversation, because the intuitive eating is more along the lines of like, hey, I don't have to count anything. I don't have to do anything other than put the food on my plate and eat it and assess for 5 or 10 minutes after, right? That's to me what intuitive eating should be, right? How do you accomplish that? Number one, make sure your lifestyle lines up with giving your body the right information of what it needs. And the way it does that is through your mitochondria, right? Your mitochondria make every single thing in your body when it comes to energy production. Think of it like an oil refinery, okay? When you take oil, it doesn't do anything for anybody, okay? Like I could give you a barrel of oil and it's very valuable, but you're not going to be able to do jack shit with that, right? You take it to an oil refinery and they make it into 50, 100 different things that are useful to you now, right? That's what your mitochondria is doing to light, water, and food. It's taking those three things and processing them into everything that your body uses, your hormones, your neurotransmitters, um, uh, all the information, right? So if you think about it like that, if you're not making good decisions around light and water first, how are you supposed to make a decision on food, right? Because that's the third part of the stool, right? And I'll tell you, the first two, the water and the sunlight, contribute way more than 30% to that whole equation. So if you're concentrating on only this part of the stool, the food, and you're neglecting the water and the sunlight, how is your mitochondria going to process and make the correct things for you? It won't. That's the thing. That's how you end up with conditions like um, prediabetes, diabetes, other metabolic conditions, heart disease, things of those natures, because your body's not really understanding what to do because it doesn't have the other inputs. It's not a
Yeah.
fine-tuned, efficient oil refinery or energy refinery, right? And so, but once it is, right, once you have proper water, proper sunlight, now all of a sudden your decisions around food start to change. And you'll notice that with people like here's a perfect example. I talked a little bit about like um, eating at night with light on. Well, what happens if you just change that, right? Like let's just say you go all out and you just start turning off your lights at night. The sun goes down, you turn off your lights. You don't have a screen on. You read a book instead, or play games like board games or something like that with your, if you have a family or whatever. You just turn down the lights and maybe you have like one lamp on or something like that. Will that change your cravings at night? Yes, 100%. Just by changing your lighting environment, it changes what you're going to put in your mouth. Or maybe even it changes so much that you don't even put anything in your mouth, right? At night. Did that change your calorie input? Absolutely. It changed your energy output as well. It probably is also going to change how you sleep. You see what I'm saying? So those are where intuitive eating really needs to be dialed in as far as lifestyle. And then the possibilities of intuitive eating go up quite a lot, to the point where you're not going to have to count calories or anything like that. Um,
And I think this is where people have disconnected themselves with understanding that we have a lot of people pushing, hey, you need so many calories for such body weight, such and such. And if someone comes to me, usually I don't give them anything about nutrition for a few weeks, just because I want to see how they respond to their training and lifestyle changes and whatnot. And only then, hey, let's incorporate your food now. Let's see if we can change something with this now. Because if you throw everything at them, you don't even know what works.
Absolutely. And so for these first 2 weeks, do you just have them record what they eat? And
Yeah, I oftentimes like, hey, 7 days, I need to know what's happening in a weekday, what's happening in a weekend.
yeah.
And we're not going to change anything because you just started to changing your training and your lifestyle habits and those kind of things. So throwing zinc at you with changing everything is most likely just going to be overwhelming for your brain, and you're just going to burn out.
So in other words, what you're telling me is you concentrate on lifestyle factors, like things that will influence how often they get outside, things that will influence how much walking they do, things that will influence how much water they're drinking. You're capitalizing on these things. And then this third thing about food, you kind of wait till the end to make the
It sorts itself out once you get those sorted. That's the thing.
Yeah, so there you go. You literally are already kind of teaching them without teaching them how intuitive eating works at the base level.
So when you compare calorie counting, macro counting, intuitive eating, which is, so let's say in which would be more applicable for health that doesn't tax you physically, mentally, and whatnot, which would be more preferred for athletics. So, and where is the distinction?
Yeah, so I would say if you have your lifestyle lined up correctly, intuitive eating will definitely be much more applicable for like health purposes, because you're not going to be wasting so much mental energy or thought processes or anything really on the food that you're eating. You're going to eat when you feel you're ready to eat, and you're going to basically choose the foods in a prerequisite manner, right? So these foods are already whole foods. The moment you go there, you're already exponentially increased your health compared to processed foods. Now, just to answer that exact question quickly before I move on a little more deeply into that, when it comes to performance, okay, you probably are going to be better off with at least macro counting, not necessarily like putting it in an app and knowing exactly what, but at least knowing, hey, I do need to get a certain level of protein, for example. I don't really want to or have the ability to go below that if I want to choose a performance outcome, right? Um, and depending on that outcome, it could be the same for a different macronutrient like carbohydrates, right? It could be like, hey, I need a certain level of carbohydrates for this particular outcome of my performance. So that's where at least knowing your macros and getting a very good idea of how much of those you need is going to be beneficial. Do I feel like you need to go to the point where it's like, hey, I'm eating 350 carbohydrates and not 300 carbohydrates? No, I actually don't think that it needs to be that precise, because your energy output and your energy expenditure will change day to day.
Yeah.
Like it's not, I don't feel that you need to be like that exact precise. In fact, when it comes to real performance, you may end up, sometimes you're like, wow, I had to eat almost twice as much food that I normally would have. And it happens randomly in cycles of like 2 to 3 weeks. Why? Because your training and your performance is pushing you in that direction. So it makes sense that eventually your body's going to be like, hey, we need way more at this current time because we're doing something special here, right? So you almost have to start tying the macro counting and like kind of knowing the basics of like where your minimums need to be, and then all of a sudden you're going to get a wave of like, hey, I needed way more food for 3 or 4 days straight. And does that make sense with everything that I've been doing for the 3 or 4 weeks before? And if the answer is yes, then guess what? Intuitive eating can trump your macronutrient intake for that moment in time, right? But it only starts to happen if you're really paying attention to your body. And how do you know that? By being in tune with your environment. That's kind of how that goes. Now when it comes to the health aspect, right, with just flat out intuitive eating, you're not counting anything. I'll add in, we said, or I said, whole foods, rule number one. Rule number two, if you live somewhere where it's seasonal, so in other words you have 4 seasons, you want to at least bias towards things that grow in those seasons. Okay, so if it's winter, does that mean you need to go out to the supermarket and buy fresh bananas and fresh strawberries every single day for your food? No, I probably would say that that would be a wrong assumption, because your body understands that it's winter. If you're doing all your lifestyle things correctly, you're getting outside, you're exposing yourself to some cold. I don't mean you need to take cold showers, or ice baths. I just mean step outside so that your body understands what temperature it is outside, right? And step outside so that your body understands the sunlight time, like how long is the day. Those will change depending on the season. And guess what? Those also change. They change what grows, right? So if your body is like, hey, it's clearly winter, and you start feeding it bananas regularly every day, it's going to do different things with the chemicals that you're getting from that banana than if you ate that banana in the summer, right? So you start lining it up more cohesively. So how does that mean in wintertime, since we're in winter? It means, well, protein sources are going to be year round, right? Because animals can live in the winter, right? So protein sources start becoming more priority in the winter. The fattier, the better. Why? Because in winter, we're mammals, okay, and we're warm-blooded mammals. And if you live in winter and you happen to be a haplotype, a mitochondrial haplotype that is a northern latitude, you're going to have a unique quirk in your mitochondria that makes it uncouple. What does that mean? It means that you make heat. Okay. How do you make heat most efficient? You make it with fat, with body fat. That's the reason why mammals put on body fat, is so that they can burn it in the colder months for heat, right? So there is a lot of science, and a lot of people will in the carnivore realm kind of tout this, right? So it kind of becomes, oh, it's a carnivore thing, but it's not. It's a real thing, and that is it lowers inflammation. Why does it lower inflammation? Because cytochrome 2 doesn't pump protons across the cell membrane. It's as simple as that. What does that mean when it comes to fats? A lot of fat electrons, right? FADH, I believe, go to cytochrome 2. And because it doesn't pump protons, it means it creates less reactive oxygen species. That's inflammation. Okay. So if you're in the winter and you're biasing more towards a little higher protein, a little higher fat with a little bit of vegetables on the side, guess what you're going to do? You're providing a high quality food with lots of protein, and your body knows that it's winter. So that means it's going to take the fat that you consume, burn it into heat, And that process automatically means that your reactive oxygen species is lower. Your inflammation will be lower. That is a good thing in the winter. It's think of winter not as like it's a harsh environment, but mammals have adapted to use it to their benefit. And the benefit is you come out of it leaner if you do it right and in better metabolic condition for the onslaught of high sunlight, high activity to come next, which is spring and summertime, right? That's actually when you create the most reactive oxygen species. When you're training hard, you're moving a lot, you're awake longer for longer periods of time because the sunlight is longer, right? So your body is preparing you for what comes next by default of the foods that are actually available in nature and the environment that your body has responded to. Hey, it is cold, it's winter, we're probably going to have a lot of protein and a lot of fat. That means reactive oxygen species will be low, inflammation will be low. We will emphasize autophagy and apoptosis for cellular regeneration. So that means that you can get leaner, get more muscle, because there will be less inflammation in the whole system. You come out in the springtime, now you're more prepared for more activity. So that's kind of a gist of like how would I tell somebody to intuitively eat right now? Get
So
outside.
can you touch up on metabolism? Can you fix metabolism? Because some of the people will say, "Hey, I can't do this because like my friend does exactly the same what I do, and he can eat whatever the hell he wants, and he not putting weight on. I look on a cake and I just get fat." So what's
Yeah,
happening there?
yeah. So it comes back to the mitochondrial haplotype. So what is metabolism, right?
So does that mean this will affect your intuitive eating as well?
Absolutely. In fact, that's probably the reason why there's such a discrepancy when it comes to, let's just say dieting, right? So everybody kind of wants to diet. I have to diet. I like. There are some people that are like, "Hey, I diet on like 3,000 calories," or same body weight, same kind of build. They have to diet on 1,500 calories, right? Why is this so different? And there's two components to that. One is environmental slash lifestyle, right? So everything where you live, what your day to day life is, because that impacts your mitochondria, because your mitochondria can change. And that is the other part of the equation. What haplotype is your mitochondria? Are you a tightly coupled mitochondria or an uncoupled mitochondria? So can you change it, right? Can you change it? Yes. The way you change it is by emphasizing your environment, make environmental changes. You touched on it right before we started, which is, hey, can how many calories do you think you were dieting when you were eating bread and jam and like explain your little dieting phase, but
Yeah, we
also
were touching
explain,
about can you outwork a bad diet?
yeah,
And that last couple times when I've dieted, I've just pretty much ate whatever the hell I wanted, but I was training twice a day. I was outside. I would say at least 5 hours a day, and then doing cardiovascular work as well. So like really heavy input.
right, right. So you told me a little bit about like your step count for the day. What was it?
Yeah, it was over 20,000 easy,
Yeah,
25,000 if not
yeah,
more.
25,000, close to 30,000. Almost all, if not all of those steps
All of
were
them outside,
outside, right?
different times of the day as well.
Yeah, yeah. So you were outside a lot, you were moving a lot outside, and it wasn't even very stressful, I'm sure. You just spent a lot of
Oh no,
time
no.
outside, and you were literally eating whatever the hell you wanted. I mean, what was the staple there on your dieting phase?
Milk and jam sandwiches.
Milk and jam sandwiches. Right. Okay. So that like okay, outworking a bad diet, can you do it? Yeah, absolutely. What are you willing to do? Are you willing to spend 5 hours outside getting 25,000 steps or so? Are you willing to do that? Day after day, right? Because it didn't happen in one day, right?
Mm.
And that sort of stuff. And that ties directly into like metabolism. Did you change your metabolism? Absolutely. You changed it by several outputs, not just the walking, because I guarantee you would not have gotten the same outcome if you would have taken those 25,000 steps on a treadmill inside every day.
Mm.
It wouldn't have been the same, specifically because of what you were eating. What were you eating? You were eating bread, jam, and milk. Okay. Lots of carbohydrates with some proteins on the side, right? if you would have and was it in the summer or at least
It was like in the summer, yeah,
yeah,
close to end of the summer.
yeah, so lots of sunlight
Yeah,
days, right?
yeah.
If you would have tried to attempt that
Like
in the
four
winter,
o'clock in the morning, it's in light already, and so that's
right,
when I would start my day, and then I finish last walk would be around 10 o'clock at night, and it's still sunny outside.
right. So again, it goes back to, okay, would if we did that exact same, so you've already said, hey, I got shredded. You stepped on stage at the end of that, right?
Yeah, top three in universe, won England championship.
Yeah.
So I
So so
didn't do bad at all.
right. So you didn't do bad at all. You got really shredded, and you did that by eating jam and milk and bread. If you tried to do that in the winter, I guarantee you don't get the same outcome, even though you've proven that you can eat these foods and get that outcome. Does that make sense? You change the equation just by when you do it and the environment that you do it in.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example of, can you change your metabolism? Yes. It's not just about the activity, it's about where you do the activity that also changes that, because the foods that now you can intuitively eat, you didn't count any calories, you just ate when you were hungry.
And I
Yeah,
think necessary to add as well is that I've been doing it for over 10 years.
right. I mean, yeah, but
My
that goes
body is
into
just so used to this.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, but over 30 years of being outside, being active, being athletic, be not just training in the gym, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all the things that we've been talking about in the previous episodes. Those all culminated into, hey, Eurus has the ability to, as long as he stays outside and gets activity in for 5 hours, he's going to be able to eat whatever the hell he wants, pretty much, and still get shredded. Uh, and he didn't have to count any calories. It that that outcome, that whole scenario is what I call actual intuitive eating. It didn't start with, mm, I'm just going to eat bread and jam and I'm going to try to gauge how much to eat,
Yeah.
right? Like, it didn't start there. It started with, hey, I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm going to go get my ass outside and just walk. When I get hungry, and then I'm going to train. And when I get hungry, I'm going to have whatever I feel like having. You happen to want to have bread and jam and milk. Okay.
Yeah.
You could have chosen other things, and I guarantee you would have chosen similar type of things, right? They would have been like, blueberries and oatmeal and other things. They would have been the similar types of macros
Yeah. It
without even
wouldn't be a
counting
steak
anything.
after that. No.
Yeah. But now, okay, you've gone to Tony Robbins events. Are in the winter, going into winter, that sort of stuff. Are
Steak
you
every day, salmon,
right?
avocados.
Yeah, exactly. So, are you eating bread and jam? No, like, you're probably not even eating any bread and jam,
No.
right? So that's what intuitive eating actually starts to look like when you really start doing the basics correctly. Yes, can intuitive eating happen? Absolutely. It starts to happen on its own. And it's not about the amount, it's about the food that you're choosing and when you're eating it and the environment that you're eating it. That's the whole shot of what intuitive eating means to me. And you are the perfect example in that scenario.
So I think, let me know if you agree. If you round it all up, if you want to get to a point where you intuitively eat, you need to understand some kind of basics of nutrition. So maybe it would be extremely useful to go through a period where you count your calories, count your macros, understand what's where, how. So when you even do eat intuitively, you just don't eat something that is not going to benefit you much, because there might be a wrong signal in that body sends to your brain about what you actually crave at the moment. So would you say a progression of, hey, let's count calories, let's dig into macros, then start eating intuitively would be a best case scenario for someone who wants to get to that point?
Yes. When it comes to the actual food, yes, I would say that if you are starting from nowhere, start there for sure, because it starts to give you, like you said, an eye on, ooh, that's how much carbohydrates, that's how much 50 carbs of carbohydrates looks like. That's about that amount. Okay. This is what it looks like on a processed food, right? Because when you're counting calories, you actually kind of have to look at, oh, one, or actually, it's not even a cup, it's 3/4 of a cup of cereal is one serving. And Then you put it in a bowl, you actually measure out 3/4 of a cup, and you're like, fuck, that's not very much. Right?
Yes, it's peanut butter when you put one measurement and you measure it and you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, yes, do I think that you need to start there? Yes, because it starts to give you an idea of how much does it actually look like, right? And then you go into macros so that you can start figuring out on your own, hey, oh, that's a good protein source, and that's not such a good protein source. And once you got those basics down and you've done them for a while, then you can venture into intuitive eating, especially if you're doing the lifestyle stuff correctly. Because then when you get a craving, for example, right now you're in the winter, you're not eating bread and jam. When you get the hunger signal, hell, right before this call, okay, you're like, fuck, I'm hungry as hell. I just trained, and I'm about to get on a call with David. I need something quick, but I don't want junk, right? Though that process of making that decision is intuitive eating, right? So what did you choose?
Scrambled eggs, some cheese, and
Yeah,
whole wheat bread with some pate.
yeah, exactly, right. So you made choices. The bulk of your calories came from protein and fat in that meal, right? But it's winter time, and that's appropriate. Go back to what I stated a little bit earlier. It's appropriate in the winter to have high protein, higher fat content, and not so much on the carbohydrate content. If this would have been summertime and it would have been the same scenario, I promise you would have chosen a different meal for that scenario.
Yeah, well, after training, I could have chosen whey protein and some carb drink and whatnot, but I just know it would not sit well with my body. It just wouldn't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. At this point in time, but you've done that before at other times of the year where it does sit well.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what I'm getting at with this whole thing. It goes on to being conscious of where you're at on the globe and what time of year it is, and are you actually exposing yourself, and your body knows what that is. When your body knows what time it is, you automatically start making decisions differently, just like you did earlier today.
Yeah. Awesome. Right, I'm going to let you off. Really appreciate your time. I think we put out our thought across about where people could start to get there. And that
Yeah.
being said, we'll catch up on next video.
Awesome. Thank you.